any examples that we share or any reference to an institution or vendor is strictly for illustration and training purposes only. So should you have any similarities with your institution or organization you work for, that will be purely coincidence. And if there's any preference to products or services, this does not constitute an endorsement or preference by myself. So I like giving that disclaimer so that everybody is comfortable. And I guess I would like to encourage each one of us to share from your personal experiences. Just feel free to bring in your thoughts. I'll occasionally pause to ask for your comments so that we get to learn, because it is through such forum that you're able to learn from each other's experience. Okay. Now, this program is basically designed to prepare you for success on the CISA exam. And you are actually one step in the process of becoming certified. So I will touch on the CISA exam or information about the CISA exam and certification. I'll talk about what is required to do CISA. We'll have some activities, questions, and group discussions, or not necessarily group, but I'll be asking for thoughts or comments as we go along. I have prepared those separately sample exam questions, which I will share later on. I would like us to go through the module first, then I will share the questions. Now, these questions will have also answers, and I would encourage that you do the question first before you go into the answer. So I would give real-world examples in some instances as we go along. Okay. What are the benefits of becoming a CISA certified person? If you are CISA certified, you have a competitive advantage. It helps you achieve high professional standards. It also gives you the benefit or helps confirm and demonstrate your knowledge and experience in information systems audit, your area of specialization. It also quantifies and markets your experience and provides global recognition as a mark of excellence. And by the way, the information systems audit certification is recognized globally. The American National Standards Institute, the American Department of Defense, and many other worldwide organizations recognize CISA certification. And while it is based out of the US, the head office in Chicago, with several locations where the chapter is hosted. With the CISA certification, you also would increase your value to your organization. Once you have the certification, you become marketable or further marketable with the knowledge and experience that you'll have acquired in this program. Maybe I may want to ask how many of you are members of ISACA as an organization? You've heard of Information Systems Audit. How many of you are members? Are you members or not yet members? Maria, are you a member of ISACA?
No, not yet.
Not yet. Krishna?
Not yet. I was having some problem in the payment while doing the payment. Last time I tried doing it, but yeah, I couldn't register.
Okay, but you heard about the organization?
Yes, of course, yes.
Okay. Edward, Rose, have you?
Yeah, I'm not sure, to be honest, because I've already attempted the CISA once, but that was about 5 years ago. I'm not sure if my membership is valid since then.
Okay, yeah, but I think there's a chapter in Berlin, so
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it's just good to know that. How about you, Talha? Have you heard of ISAC?
No, I was recently looking into the same, but I got some advice to select the chapters. Uh, so that's why I thought I'll do some research and see which chapter needs to be added. So it didn't go through, but yeah, so not yet. That's right.
Okay, but I think there should be a chapter in Kuwait also. The ISACA has chapters in many countries. I guess Dubai, Italy, Berlin, Kuwait, and everywhere. I mean, in many countries, basically. So maybe just check for a local chapter. You can always
Yeah.
move locations with a chapter, so you don't have to, even if you're a member of a chapter, probably where you came from, you can always ask to be, your chapter membership to be transferred to the local organization. But why I'm asking that is if you're a member of ISACA, you get some discounts in the exam. You get some discounts in the materials, and you get some opportunity to also network with other professional colleagues. So the discounts are actually significant. So I would encourage just take your time and go through the ISACA website. It's www.isaca-org. If you can find time to browse through the website, you will get to know more about the program. There are also materials that you can obtain from being a member of the chapter. And if you are a registered member, then there's the benefits, the discounted benefits that you will enjoy as a member. So that is just some of the information I want to just share with you. Okay. Now, in terms of what we call the job practice, this exam has 5 domains. So one domain 1, that is what we are starting off today, is the information systems auditing process. So it covers 21% of the exams. The exam has about 150 questions. So 21% of that is under domain 1. Domain 2 talks about governance and management of IT. Then we look at domain 3, which talks about information systems acquisition, development, and implementation. And then domain 4 talks about information systems operations, maintenance, and business resilience. Domain 5 talks about protection of information assets. So domain 1 has 21%, domain 2 has 17% questions, domain 3 has 12%, domain 4 has 23%, and domain 5 will have 27%. Now, all these percentages, they comprise questions that you will have to answer. And this exam, the interesting bit about it is that the pass mark is not just a simple average. You have to pass all the domains for you to be considered to have passed the CISA exams. So you have to pass all, and it's not about simple average. Okay, so just be aware of that. Now the exam is based on job practice, meaning it's usually an advantage where you have experience having worked. So basically, what that means is that the more experience, the easier it is technically. But still, you have to read to pass the exam. you have to create time to pass the exam, and lots of time to pass the exam. So the topics that candidates are expected to understand are described in a series of task and knowledge statements. So the task statements describe the specific task that the CISA candidates should be able to perform. And knowledge statements are the knowledge areas required in order for the candidate to perform the tasks. So test questions are specifically designed to validate that the candidate possesses the knowledge to perform a given task. So basically what this means, at the end of the program, I will share with you, or I can even share with you prior to that, questions that would give you a feel of how the exam would be conducted. So I will share that with you in either the group WhatsApp, or I will share that with you on Google Docs, so that you are able to have a feel of how the exam is conducted. So the exam questions are developed with the intent of measuring and testing both of the following: your practical knowledge and the application of general concepts and standards. So all questions are multiple choice and are designed for one best answer from the 4 options given. So you are to give the best answer from the 4 options that are given. And they usually would have what we call the scenario-based questions, which have a description of a situation, and you're required to answer 2 or more questions based on the information provided. So they are what we call the scenario-based questions, where they give you a description of a situation, and then you'd be expected to give a response, probably more than one answer, 2 or more than one answer. You're expected to read each question carefully, as is the case with any other exam. So you read each question carefully, and you eliminate what we call the incorrect answers. Now, this is an American administered exam, and the way they administer this exam is that the answers provided, in most times, they look alike. So you are supposed to eliminate the incorrect answers. You make the best choice possible, and you identify what we call the keywords or phrases in the question. So things like most, best, or first, before selecting and recording an answer. So you'll see from the questions I'll share with you, there's where they talk about the most, best, or first. And you're supposed to take note of that before you select an answer. Okay. So you're expected to read the provided instructions before attempting to answer questions. So you may miss the point if you do not read the questions properly. So we are saying you answer all questions. There's no penalty for wrong answers. Okay. Grading is based solely on the number of questions that are answered correctly. You need to become familiar with the exact location of the exam, travel route, etc. But I guess that should not worry us for now. The usual protocols of exams, you are expected to be at the exam testing site prior to your scheduled appointment time, etc. Fortunately, today you can do the exams online. So those are arrangements that and the details that are available on the CISA website, which I encourage you to go and browse. So the exam is administered over a 4-hour period, and it basically allows about 1.5 minutes per question. Yeah. So it's just a matter of being able to prepare yourself in a manner that you're able to spend not more than 1.5 minutes per question. Okay. Now, I think we can now move to having given you preparation. We can now move to domain 1, which covers the process of auditing information systems. Now, domain 1, basically if you look at the overview, information systems auditing basically covers standards, principles, methods, guidelines, practices, and techniques that an IS auditor uses to plan, execute, assess, and review business or information systems and related processes. So basically, when talking about information systems audit, we're talking about how you would approach an assignment, how you'd apply the audit principles, how you'd apply standards, what type of methods you would use, what type of practices or what type of techniques you'd use, even as you plan your audit, as you execute the audit, and even as you assess or review business or information systems and related processes. Now, when we talk about business and related processes, that basically means you're looking at information systems process in an organization. So you need to have a thorough understanding of the auditing process as well as IS processes. You need to understand the business processes, and you need to understand the controls that have been designed to achieve the organizational objectives and protect organizational assets. So basically what I'm saying here is that you cannot audit what you don't understand. You need to understand the IS processes first before you move on to conduct or execute your businesses. So I've heard from your introductions, you have several years in the audit, IS audit role. So I guess some of these narratives that I've talked about must be familiar with you in the process of your auditing. So it's just important to get to know that as a recap of the requirements or part of the process that an IS auditor would go through. So the objectives of this domain, you should be able, when you complete this domain, or when we complete this domain, you should be able to plan an audit. You should be able to determine in the course of planning whether information systems are protected, controlled, and provide value to the organization. You should be able to conduct an audit in accordance with the IS audit standards and a risk-based IS audit strategy. You should be able to communicate the progress of the audit, findings, results, and recommendations to stakeholders. I guess you are familiar with that. When you conduct your audit, you should be able to come up with findings. You should be able to communicate the progress of the audit, the results, and recommendations. So meaning I would expect that you have, or it is recommended that you have your format for communication. and we'll see ahead or even hear from some of you what that means. So you should be able to conduct subsequent audit follow-up. So follow-up basically is an activity that is done by auditors to evaluate whether the issues that you had raised earlier have been sufficiently addressed. And then we'll be able to evaluate IT management and monitoring of controls, how IT management have put in place mechanisms to monitor and put in place controls in the organization. We'll also talk about data analytics tools to streamline the audit processes. So basically, I would want to also later on hear from you whether there are any type of tools that you use to streamline your audit processes. Because today with technology and volume of data, you actually need to be operationally efficient for you to be able to turn around the audit process in an effective manner. We also, at the end of this domain, be able to identify opportunities for process improvement. So when you conduct an audit or you perform an audit, you are expected to be able to add value to the organization. So one of the ways is for you to be able to identify areas of opportunities and areas for process improvement in the organization's IT policies and practices. So part of the audit is not just about raising issues, but it's also a matter of coming up with value additions in the process as you conduct the audit. Now, the topics that we will cover, we look at planning, we look at IS audit standards, guidelines, and codes of conduct ethics. We look at business processes. We'll talk about types of controls. We'll talk about risk-based audit planning, types of audits and assessments, the execution, the audit project management, sampling methodology, audit evidence collection techniques, data analytics, reporting and communication techniques, and quality assurance and improvement of the audit process. So those are the areas we will cover between today and tomorrow. So I'll want to also accelerate a bit so that we're able to cover in time what we need to do between today and tomorrow. So part of the planning includes introduction. When you go for an audit or before you commence an audit, you need to introduce yourself to your clients. You don't just walk into an audit before introduction of who you are and what it is exactly you are going to review. So there has to be some introduction. You'll also look at the audit standards that you want to apply, the guidelines and code of ethics. There are code of ethics that an auditor is expected to abide by, is expected to follow. You also need to understand the business processes, like I mentioned earlier. You cannot audit an area that you don't understand. You need to understand the business area before you audit the entity. Basically, that goes without saying. You need to have the knowledge of what to audit or how to audit or how to go about it in the course of execution. Okay. So what is audit basically? So here we say IS audit is the formal examination and or testing of information systems to determine whether they are in compliance with applicable laws, regulations, contracts, or industry guidelines. So when you're doing an IS audit, you are basically formally examining or and testing the systems to determine whether they are in compliance with applicable laws, regulations, contracts, or industry guidelines. You basically, when you do an information systems audit, you want to determine whether the systems comply with governance criteria and related or relevant policies and procedures. You also want to determine that the data and information have appropriate levels of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And also, when you do an IS audit, you want to determine whether the operations are accomplished efficiently and effectively, and the targets are met. Now, if you look at all this, I guess from my own knowledge, okay, I'm not sure about the Middle East, Kuwait, and Dubai in terms of the regulations. Maybe Krishna or Talha will tell us. I don't know about Italy either, but I think Germany, there are stringent laws around information systems and their industry guidelines. Maybe Maria, could you tell us anything you know about the how is the regulatory environment in Germany, sorry, in Italy, around the information systems? Are there any regulations, laws expected that people are expected to follow?
Yes, I work for the financial sector, and the bank have the banks have a regulation that is called Circular 285, and the general bank regulated also the information security for banks. For the other sector, I don't know.
Okay, at least that is good. We have heard about the banks. What about Krishna? Let me not assume that there are no regulations in Dubai. Are there any that you're aware of that guide the industries?
One which I'm aware of is the cyber security and protection of the information systems. That's the information assurance, the information systems assurance regulation.
Okay. How about sorry, yeah, carry on.
Yeah, previously I worked on in a US based firm, so there we had SOX compliance because it was a US based firm, and it has operating locations in US, and it was listed on the New York Stock Exchange. So we had to comply on the SOX framework.
Okay, good. How about Edward Rose in Germany? Any regulations that
I
you're
believe
aware
in
of?
Germany, I think it's the IDW PS 982, which is the internal controls compliance requirement.
Okay. Oh, good. That's good. What about Talha in Kuwait? Any regulations that you're aware of?
Yeah, there are few similar to Dubai. So there are banking regulations. Here, the Central Bank of Kuwait have some regulations for banks. So they have cybersecurity frameworks which the banks needs to be compliant with. In addition to that, so it depends upon the company if they need to be PCI compliant and all. So those kind of compliance are in line to that. Yeah. But there's no specific audit compliance in that manner, as of what I'm aware of.
Okay, that's good. At least it's comforting to hear the regulations in various stages, which is good. And I guess the essence of this activity also helps us understand the various or different environments. In Kenya, we there are also regulations on the national payment systems that governs payments between banks. It also governs payments within the mobile network operators, the national payment system. We have regulations on data protection and privacy. We have regulations on the use of information systems, basically the Kenya Communication Act of 2008. Okay, and again, depending on the sector, there are various regulations that come up. For the financial services, we have the central bank that comes up with guidelines on how they need to operate. Things like business continuity planning and all those kind of KYC, etc. So all those are is important as an IS auditor to be familiar with, so that as you conduct your audit, you are able to determine whether the systems are in compliance with the applicable laws, regulations, or the levels of confidentiality, integrity, and availability are defined. In Kenya, we also have regulations that define the extent to which services have to be available. So that is important for us all to be aware of. Okay, good. Now looking at the audit process, the audit process generally involves 3 steps. There's the planning, there's the field work and documentation, and the reporting and follow-up. So once you do the planning, you establish, you want to know whether you have capacity, whether you have the skills to go and audit, whether you also, part of planning, you come up with the scope. Part of planning, you come up with all the logistical requirements that you need to enable you conduct an audit. Then there's the field work that, of course, now is where you gather information around the audit, looking at the controls, looking at the conducting tests, and coming up with your findings, obtaining all documentation that is relevant and important as part of the audit process. Then you do your reporting. The reporting generally would cover a summary for the executives and the detailed issues for the management. Because the management, being the key auditees, you need to get the details of your finding. So part of the practice of audit basically involves sharing the findings as and when you progress with the audit, especially where you come across significant issues. Then it is just good practice. That is what I also learned, that as you move along, just good to have confirmation with the business unit on the findings that you raise, so that you are sure they are factual and they are also agreeing with their findings, so that you do not report based on a basis that is not factual, or you do not create alarm where it is not called for. Generally, your findings should not create alarms. There has to be consensus. Well, they don't have to always agree with you, but you need to have your facts, and they need to be aware of what these issues are, as long as you follow the right procedure. So these phases can be further broken down into some phases, like the reporting phase can be broken down into report writing and issuance, issue follow-up, and audit closing. So organization and the naming convention of these phases can be customized as long as the procedures and outcomes comply with the applicable audit standards. Okay, so let's look at the IS audit and assurance standards. So this IS audit and assurance standards, they define the what we will call the mandatory requirements for IS auditing and reporting. And they basically would inform the auditors the minimum level of acceptable performance required to meet the professional responsibilities set in the CISA Code of Professional Ethics. So, like I said, you can always, I would encourage each one of you to join the local chapter. So we just go through the website to get to know what are these Code of Professional Ethics, what does it talk about? And there are various documentations which I will mention later on as we move on, that you can always obtain for your purposes of reference to help you then understand and adopt the audit and assurance standards as you perform your audit. So these audits and assurance standards, they come up with mandatory requirements that will ensure management and other interested parties are able to work with within the expectations. And these standards also, what they do, they ensure that holders of the CISA designation will continue to conduct their audit assignments in a professional manner as per the requirement. So the fundamental elements of IS audit are defined and provided within ISACA's IS audit and assurance standards and guidelines, the Code of Professional Ethics, which are available on the ISACA website if you just browse through. Okay. So the framework for the ISACA audit and assurance standards, it provides for multiple levels of documents. So there are those that define mandatory requirements for IS audit and assurance and reporting. They are also guidelines that provide how you apply the IS audit and assurance standards. So we are told that the IS auditor should consider them in determining how to achieve implementation. Use your professional judgment in the application and be prepared to justify any departure from standards. The audit and assurance standards also provide tools and techniques on how to meet the standards when completing an IS auditing work, and so that you are end of day able to fall within the CISA or CISA certification or designation as an auditor. So the certain standards that you need to adhere to, certain practices, certain ethics that you need to adhere to when you are conducting your audits. For instance, like I said, when you are conducting the audit, where you need to keep your auditee up to date on how you're progressing, just good practice. Where there's anything significant, it's just good to let them know. Don't hold it to surprise them. The idea is not to surprise anybody, but to share what is of improvement or concern to you as an auditor. Okay. So let's look at the standards and guidelines. There are three categories. One is the general standard, which has the guiding principles, and you apply it to conduct all assignments and deal with ethics, independence, objectivity, and due care, as well as knowledge, competency, and skill. The other one deals with performance, how you conduct the assignment, things like planning, the supervision, how you come up with a scope, how you determine the risk, how you determine materiality, things, how do you mobilize your resources, how do you supervise assignment, management, and audit evidence. There's what we call then the third category, which is of reporting. How do you address the types of reports? How do you communicate? And what do you communicate? If I may ask any of you to comment, do you have this kind of arrangement in terms of before you conduct an audit? Do you do a planning? Do you scope? Do you have standard ways of communicating your audits in terms of the audit reports, who you issue them to, and what to talk about? Anybody can comment on that. Do you have any standard way of conducting audits? Anyone
Yeah,
can
we
comment?
generally, yeah, so before starting any audit, generally what we do is we have the scope with us, like what all things we have to scope in for a particular audit in the information security. So the domains and so what are the domains that we're going to cover? For example, authentication and the application, changes to applications and all this. Like these are the domains which we list down. And then we identify who will be our stakeholders, who will be the report will be issued to whom, and which other, like, C levels of the company, or a board of the directors, or if in case there is an audit committee in the organization, then with them.
Oh, okay, that's good.
And then we also look at the risk management, basically the IT, the risk management framework which they have.
Okay, that's good. Anybody else who wants to make a comment? Okay, so I guess we can do one more slide before we take a break. So we have what we call the CISA IS Audit and Assurance Guidelines. So we are encouraged here to understand that the guidelines help us to use professional judgment when applying them to specific audits. They also are good for us to consider them to determine how to implement the IS audit process and be able to justify any departure from the ISACA audit and assurance standard. So, for instance, there are times when there could be a deviation from policy. You need to then verify whether that situation warrants that deviation, and that must be supported by what we call a dispensation policy. So when the deviation comes up or is required to be conducted, you require to come up with the dispensation, then it should be clear on what type of control measures have been put in place to justify the deviation or the departure from the recommended process. So that is also part of what is defined in the audit and assurance guidelines. So maybe because it is now, we just done 1 hour, I normally recommend us to take some health break. How many minutes would be okay with you? 10 minutes? Is 10 minutes okay?
Yes, thanks.
Okay,
Yes.
10 minutes. So let's let's meet at what is it called? 40 minutes. No, is it 40 minutes? Or so time it's 11:30. So let's meet at 40 minutes to the hour. Is it not 40 minutes? Sorry, 10 minutes past now, past the hour now. So that will be, okay, it is 11:40, 11:30 here. So what time do we meet? So 11:40. So in the next 10 minutes, we can meet. So what you do when you come in, just raise your hands on the, so that I know you are back. Okay, so
Okay,
we can have.
okay.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hello.
The room begins. I think we can carry on. Are we all
Yes.
there?
Yes. I wanted to ask one question, sorry. Hello.
Yes, I think we can carry on now.
Can you hear me? Hello.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Roy, can he hear me?
Hello.
Yeah. Hi. I wanted to ask something.
Yes.
We can ask the questions in between when you're explaining, or we are waiting for the end of the session and then we will be having a Q&A kind of.
I think you can ask as we continue. Just feel free to interrupt.
I'll
You
raise-
can also ask. Yeah.
Yeah, I can raise this hand and then I can ask them.
Yeah, either raise the hand or
Yes.
just
Yes.
yeah, just come directly. I think that will be fine. Okay.
Yeah.
So we've had a problem with our power in Kenya for the last 12 hours. I don't know what's going on today, but we have since yesterday the whole country. I don't know what happened. They keep saying that there's some monkeys that went on the poles, the electricity poles, but we have backup, so we are continuing. So yeah, I think then we can carry on. The next slide we were talking about, I think we had stopped at the Code of Professional Ethics. Just we can continue from there. So the Code of Professional Ethics basically talks about support the implementation of and encourage compliance with appropriate standards, procedures for the effective governance and management of enterprise information systems and technology. So basically, professional ethics is a requirement in audit, talking about getting to know what is right, what is wrong, compliance, the values that you adhere to by virtue of coming across audit information. You come across a lot of information by virtue of your position. So therefore, that what it means is that you are able or supposed to therefore take note of that and adhere to what is described as code of professional ethics. So you serve in the interest of the stakeholders in a lawful manner while maintaining high standards of conduct and character and not discrediting their profession or the association. So basically, when you conduct the audits, you're expected to look at the interests of the stakeholder in a lawful manner. The information that you come across, you do not end up disclosing it outside the jurisdiction of where you operate. So you're also expected to maintain privacy and confidentiality. You are expected to do that during the course of your activities. You are expected to demonstrate competency or maintain competency in your respective fields and agree to undertake only those activities that you can reasonably expect to complete with the necessary skills, knowledge, and competence. Okay. Part of the code of professional ethics also requires that you, I think I had mentioned this earlier, you inform appropriate parties of the work, results of the work performed. Remember, I talked about that disclosure of all significant facts known to them that, if not disclosed, may distort the reporting of the results. You are expected to support professional education of stakeholders through enhancing the understanding of the governance and management of enterprise information systems and technology as you conduct the audit. Okay. So far, I hope we are okay. So let me look at the other one. We talk about ITAF. So ITF basically is a framework that you just need to be aware of. But what I would want to mention is that you will not be tested on this framework, but it's just good to know about it. It establishes the standards that addresses an IS auditor's roles and responsibilities. It defines terms and concepts specific to IS assurance and provides guidance and tools and techniques on the planning, design, conduct, and reporting of IS audit. So it's not an area where you will be examined on, but it's just good to know about it as an IS auditor. Okay. So let's look at the rest. Talking about business processes. So basically, an IS auditor must understand and be able to evaluate the business processes of the organization they're auditing. That's basically a basic requirement. So it includes things like testing and evaluation of the design and implementation of the operational controls and the monitoring and testing of evidence to ensure that the internal controls within the business processes operate effectively. So it's just important for the IS auditor to be clear about where you are going to audit. Of course, you cannot audit what you don't understand. So it's just important to understand that you need to know what your area that you're going to audit. So business processes basically would be an interrelated set of cross-functional activities or events that result in the delivery of a specific product or service to a customer. So it's controlled by policies, it's controlled by procedures, controlled by practices, controlled by the organization structure. So you need to be familiar with all this, even as you prepare to undertake an assignment. Okay. Now, if you look at business processes, the areas we may want to cover, for instance, we'll look at the internal audit function. We want to look at management of the IS audit function, audit planning, the effects of laws and regulations on IS audit planning, and the business process application. So maybe I would just want to ask a few, how big are your internal audit departments? Maybe we can ask, anyone can say so. How big is your internal audit department?
In our company, it's pretty new. They have newly formed the internal audit department 2 years ago. So we are 7 of us, which includes the financial auditors, operational auditors, then compliance auditors, and IT audit.
Okay. How about anyone else?
It's pretty much the same with my organization as well, about 5 to 10, I think, so far.
Okay. How about Maria? How big is the audit?
Truly speaking, the audit department is of 2 persons. That it's me and another one, and we cover every area.
Okay. How about Zahir?
Yeah.
Talha?
Talha, yes. So since I am working as a Big Four, right? So this is our proprietary business and everything. So we have a good bunch of people. So I think as part of internal audit, we are 20 people. So which is segregated with the business and the compliance, and within IT itself, we have around 4 to 5 members.
Oh, okay. So I think then you look like, I mean, for your purposes, there's capacity, and of course, it all depends on the size of the organization and the business that you are covering. Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, basically, what we say here, the role of the IS internal audit function will be established by an audit charter approved by the board of directors and the audit committee. So there needs to exist what is called an audit charter. That is what defines, it's like your constitution, basically. So the charter is what decides audit or supports your existence. So it's a document that covers the entire scope of audit activities in an entity, and it states management's responsibility and objectives for, and the delegation of authority to the IS audit function. So the IS audit charter is different from what we call the engagement letter, because the engagement letter is more focused on a particular audit that is sought to be initiated in an organization. So the IS audit charter is a document that is important that is used to define your existence. It supports your existence. So the role of IS audit and audit function should be established by an audit charter. That one, I think you'll get a question on that. What is the audit charter and what is the purpose of having an audit charter? Okay. So managing the IS audit function should ensure value added contributions to senior management in the efficient management of IT and achievement of business objectives. So IS audit function should be managed and led in a manner that ensures that the diverse tasks performed and achieved by the audit team will fulfill the audit function objectives while preserving audit independence and competence. So you find situations where the business want to be too friendly to audit. I don't know whether you've come across those scenarios where business tries to be too friendly to audit, or their business heads who want to be too friendly to you, so that you need to be able to balance the friendliness and the objectivity and the independence so that it is not conflicted. The friendliness and objectivity should not be conflicted, should be in a manner that allows for independence to function. Your independence to function. Okay. So when talking about the next one, before you perform your audit, you perform what is called the planning. So the first step in performing an IS audit is planning. So to plan an audit, you have to perform the following tasks. Probably you're most familiar with them. So you need to list all the processes that may be considered for the audit. You need to understand or evaluate the processes by having performed a qualitative or quantitative risk assessment. Qualitative risk assessment is more driven by narratives. A quantitative risk assessment is more driven by numbers, statistical. So qualitative has narratives, quantitative has statistics or numbers. So these evaluations, they should be based on an objective criteria. So you then now determine or define the overall risk of each process, and subsequent to that, then you come up with an audit plan to include all of the processes that are rated high, which would represent the ideal annual audit plan. So audit planning is important to perform before you start your assignment. And before you start, as you perform the planning, you need to have considered through risk assessment a determination of what is high, what is medium, what is low. So usually audit would focus on areas of high risk. Audit focuses on areas of high risk first, then you move on to medium and then to low. High risk areas will be covered frequently, depending on now the objectivity of your evaluation. Okay, so you need to understand that and put that in mind as you do your audit planning. So when do you audit? So there's what we call the short-term and long-term planning as part of the audit process. So you'd want to conduct an audit where or when there are new control issues that arise. When, say, your business or the business has undertaken some changes or as there are certain control requirements that have been identified, some lapses or loopholes. You may want to do an audit just to confirm that those lapses have been identified by the business and they are being addressed. There is what we call the short-term planning, which involves audit issues that will be covered during the year. So again, that one would give you a basis for conducting your audit. Then we have what we call the long-term planning, which takes into account all risk-related issues that may be affected by the organization's IT strategic direction. Where there are any changes in the risk environment, where there are any changes in technology, or where there are any changes in business processes, that usually would call for an audit. So again, you need to be on the lookout to just confirm that these situations, as they arise, they would then put you in a manner that you are ready to conduct an audit. They are kind of trigger points or trigger measures, trigger situations that you need to be on the lookout for to then now make the consideration of starting an audit assignment. So you need to look out for this just to confirm and be sure that you are now due for an audit in the organization. So where there's a change, there's a new control, or there are issues that have come up that are strategic, then that needs to trigger you to start an audit. Now, the steps, just to look at this briefly, the audit planning steps, you need to generally have an understanding of the environment that you're to review. You cannot review what you don't understand. So basically, to understand the plan, to understand, to conduct the audit, you need to have an understanding of the business area. So you need to understand the business's mission, the business objectives, purpose, and processes. Understand whether there are any changes in the business environment of the auditee. You look at whether there are any work papers. The prior work papers, they help you with determining whether there are any significant issues that were raised and whether there are any pending issues that have not been resolved. So you look at the comments, the contents, you look at policies, you look at any standards which exist or required guidelines, procedures, and organization structure. The organization structure is useful as it tells you it gives you an indication of how teams are placed in the organization, whether there is duplication of roles, whether there is segregation of duties, whether there are gaps in the organization, whether there are staff who are on contract for extended periods, whether there are situations where there are no staff in the organization. It's a very important document that tells you. So then you do a risk analysis to come up with the audit plan, set the scope and objectives. Scope basically is to give a determination of the area that you will cover, and then you come up with a strategy to then now execute the audit. You, of course, have to assign personnel to the audit, and then, of course, address the logistics of engagement. Okay, so there are those what we would call additional considerations. So the plan should consider the objectives of the IS audit, which are relevant to the audit area and technology infrastructure, so and business strategic direction. So you can gain this by usually reading background material. It's normally important to have background knowledge about the area you're going into to audit. Get to know about whether they are what we call the industry publications about those areas or that subject, the reports and any independent financial analysis reports. It helps you with the understanding, help you with improving the understanding and knowledge, widening your knowledge of the area you're going to review. So look at prior audit reports or IT-related reports from external or internal audits, or whether there are any that have been conducted by the regulators. So you look at, again, also business and IT long-term strategic plans. So that is important as part of the additional considerations to the planning process. So there are also other ways that you can get this information. Usually you are encouraged to interview the managers who understand the business issues. It's important to get to understand or to interview key managers who understand the business issues. It's also nothing wrong with asking them to let you know what are their challenges, what are their issues. You also can seek to get whether there are any specific regulations applicable to IT. I think we mentioned the cybersecurity, I think in Kuwait and Dubai, there are regulations in Italy and in Germany. So also identify IT functions or related activities that have been outsourced. So for organizations, you must have heard of what is called outsourcing, where the entities usually would invite third parties or allow third parties to handle certain aspects or processes of the business. So again, you may want to find out which are these functions that have been outsourced. You may also want to take a tour around the organization facilities. It also helps you form part of the planning. And you must match available audit resources, such as staff within the tasks defined in the audit plan. So as you plan for the audit, you also need to be sure that you have capacity to handle a task that is ahead of you. Because in the absence of that capacity, then you'll have a challenge in terms of handling the organization's assignment. So if you don't have capacity, then you have a problem with the assignment. Okay. Then there's what we call I think we talked briefly about laws and regulations. And here we are saying that there are industries such as banks, probably mainly because, of course, banks keep money. So there are many industries that have regulations. Key among them are financial institutions. Banks have money. I mean, because they handle money, they are then expected, of course, to abide by certain regulations. So there's the banks, there's the internet service providers. They also handle communications. We have what they call the ISPs. They are closely regulated simply because of the risk and the criticality of the services that they offer. So the areas of concern, these are the two areas. The other two areas of concern that impact the audit scope and objectives. So what are the legal requirements placed on audit? And what are the legal requirements placed on the auditee in terms of the systems, the data management, and reporting, etc. So as you even plan your audit, you need to be clear about what are the legal requirements. For instance, you may have a scenario where you are not allowed to take data from the institution, or as you manipulate the data, you're expected to mask it so that customer confidentiality is maintained. So you need to also establish whether those situations exist or not. So very important to gather that information as part of your planning. Now, if you determine an organization's level of compliance, you need to understand or identify government or other relevant external requirements that deal with things like electronic data, personal data, copyrights, e-commerce, and e-signatures. I don't know to what extent your countries are have legislation around these areas on personal data, copyrights, e-signatures. And are say, for instance, e-signatures, are they allowable as evidence in your countries? Maybe anybody can comment. In our country, still not allowed yet. Still a debate. We prefer manual signed signature. Are e-signatures acceptable in Germany, Kuwait, Dubai, or Berlin, or Dubai, or Italy? Anyone?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yeah, I'm asking whether e-signatures are acceptable in your countries. We usually sign using our pens and on paper, but there are certain countries where they allow the use of electronic signatures. What is the status in your countries?
Yeah, here is acceptable.
Is acceptable?
Yes.
How about in Italy?
Also.
Also acceptable. Germany, Berlin?
To be honest, I'm not sure.
Oh, yeah, sure. Okay. What about Kuwait?
Yeah. So as part of authorization, yeah, electronic signatures are there. So through the engagement forms and all those, yes.
Okay. Yeah, for I think in Kenya, it's still middle ground. It's not, we're not sure whether it's accepted or not accepted. It's just floating there. So I guess you see then now the different circumstances and different scenarios in many countries. So again, to determine the level of compliance, you need to look at the practices that exist in the organization. So you also look at the manner in which computer programs or computers, data and programs are stored. That tells you level of compliance. Because there are organizations that will have standards, others will not have good standards, or they have the standards but they don't follow
So,
them.
yeah, I wanted to ask, so it will depend on the type of the organization's business program, right? For example, if it's a healthcare industry, then they would have to comply on the healthcare standard.
Exactly. Yes, true. Yeah, if it's the industries are based on the sector. But the
Yeah.
businesses of, yeah. So if it is health, they have there's the HIPPA, I think. There's some
HIPAA, right?
regulation.
Yeah, HIPAA. Yeah.
There's that regulation in the US. There's a regulation about different regulations about if it's some network operator, mobile network operator, you'll have different regulations. If it's banks, you'll have different regulations. If it is a manufacturing industry, etc., etc. So yes, you're right. These regulations depend on the sector. Even the academic sector, the education sector, also would have different regulations that govern how they administer themselves. So,
So
it's all important.
GDPR, so the GDPR, will it be applicable in the industry in UAE as well?
It now
Because
depends.
it
It
depends on the
depends on the company that operates. If it's a company from a GDPR jurisdiction, then you need to apply. The company should apply. For instance, if you have a company from the European Union that is based in Dubai, so that company should adhere to GDPR requirements, because those are
correct. But
requirements from there.
yeah, if they don't have the operating like unit in the European countries, if they just have the maybe the employees or the employees information or customers maybe, then they still will be included.
Yeah, what happens, like I've seen, for instance, a company that may not be from the European Union, but has employees from the European Union. There are
Yes.
certain situations where they would be required, especially if it is a multinational. There are certain situations where they will be required, or if they deal with European Union companies, there are certain situations where they will be required to comply with the GDPR regulations. Let me give an example. In Kenya, we have one of the biggest banks, or the banks generally have correspondent relationships. So a bank in Kenya that has dealings with in euro currency would have a correspondent relationship in one of the European Union countries. So this bank, for instance, has a correspondent bank in Germany, the Deutsche Bank. So a requirement arose whereby the correspondent bank in Germany would require this bank in Kenya to demonstrate compliance with the GDPR rules. Or there's another situation which arose where the American government, the US government, requires banks outside the US to submit information about American nationals who are their customers. So you find various combinations coming up. You don't have to be a GDPR-based country, but if your customers are from a GDPR jurisdiction, then you may find yourself somehow being required to comply. Just like banks today, banks that deal in dollars. If the bank deals in dollars, then you'll be expected to comply by the US government regulations about trading in countries where, for instance, they have applied sanctions. Yeah. So yes, you're right. So it comes up in various dynamics. So as an IS auditor, you need to be able to understand those kind of dynamics as they arise. So that's about audit. It's about also compliance. So it's not just about systems, but it's also about processes and about compliance. So what are the steps that you want to follow? Determine whether an organization is compliant. So you may want to obtain documents which have applicable laws and regulations. So with these documents, then you assess whether management and the IT functions have considered the relevant external requirements in their plans, policies, standards, and procedures. For instance, if you're looking at a payments area in an organization, when they process their payments, where do these payments go to? So as an operations auditor or an information systems auditor, you may want to check whether these payments are destined to countries that where this the parent company probably, or this company might end up violating regulations, international regulations around payment. So look at the applicable laws, assess whether management and IT have considered the external requirements, review the internal IT department documents that address adherence to laws that are applicable to the industry. So determine adherence with the procedures that address these requirements. Then determine if there are procedures in place to ensure contracts or agreements with external IT services providers that reflect any legal requirements related to responsibility. So basically what we are saying here is that you need to be familiar with the applicable laws. And you remember one of the slides we had said, one of the ways of getting this information is also through interviews. So when you talk to the managers, you get to know, get to understand what the requirements would be, what the practices are, and how they go about their business. So it's important to have engagements with the line managers. So looking at business processes, applications, and controls. So to effectively audit business application systems, an auditor must obtain clear understanding of the application system under review. And when talking about an integrated application environment, here you find controls are embedded and designed into the business application that supports the processes. So for instance, you're looking at payments area, you're looking at card processing area. All these have technology related events with them. So it's just important to ensure that as you look at these environments, you are familiar with the processes from the respective areas that you are assigned to look at. So basically, when talking about controls, it may talk about the management, it may talk about the programs that are in existence, it may talk about the manual controls that are in the organization. So generally, when you're doing a review of the business area, you need to understand basically the processes that are existent. So periodic review of the approvals, for instance, let's say, for instance, if you're looking at a payment area, so there are certain controls that you may want to understand. You may want to look at things like whether there's segregation of duties. You may want to look at things like the approval process, whether there's periodic review and approval of access and application controls within the business process. So how frequently is access granted? How frequently is access approved? What are the application controls in the business process? How frequently are they evaluated? So those are things like you may want to be clear about and ensure that you have a clear understanding of what is going on. Okay, so the situation you need to understand is to understand, situation you need to know is to understand how effective is the business application. How effective are the controls in place? As an auditor, do you understand, do you have a clear understanding of the application system under review? So that basically would guide you as an auditor to conduct the audit processes as an IS auditor. So in terms of application systems, there are several, and I'll not look at all of them. So we have things like point of sale systems. We have things like emails. We have things like purchase accounting systems, and there are several. They do have various type of risks that are associated with them. For instance, if you look at under e-commerce, there could be risks like the values, the destination of payment, the approvals, the turnaround time, the customer experience, all those kind of things. We look at, say, for instance, automated teller machines. Automated teller machines also have the various types of risks. Things like the loading of the cash, things like the dispensing of the cash, things like the links, stability of the links, things like establishing whether there are any loopholes that may create opportunity for backdoor entry. So those are kind of, again, controls you need to be clear about when you review this kind of application systems. When you're looking at, say, for instance, image processing, you may want to understand the control measures that have been put in place to ensure that no other unauthorized party can insert images for a customer that is not consistent with what the business approves. So you need to be clear about the control requirements of all these areas that I've listed, just as a way of preparing how to understand and how to audit the application systems. So there are several application systems. I'm not going to read all of them, but just saying here that in this slide, you need to be clear about how to address the various control loopholes that may arise as you review those areas. Okay. So in terms of using services of other auditors and experts, there are situations which arise when you may not have, as an audit team, you may not have resources to help or to undertake an assignment. And remember, I had mentioned that before you undertake an assignment, you need to be familiar with the audit area or the business area that you're going to audit. So there are situations which arise when you may want to seek services of external or outside experts. Now, when you seek their services, of course, you want to look at the impact and the professional liability. By seeking their services, what does that mean? You need to be very clear about their competence, their qualifications, and experience. You need to also be clear about what the charter talks about, what are the implications of having external auditors, and whether there are any restrictions on outsourcing. You need to again also check what that means and how you will, as a audit function, supervise the activities that will be conducted by these parties that you will have sought their views. I mean, their expertise. Okay. So, for instance, if you are to look at this activity where you have been assigned an integrated audit of a payroll process, and you need to plan the IT portion of the engagement, what is the most important business area that you may need to consider? This is an example of what you may find as an activity in an audit process. So you are asked to audit payroll process, and you need to plan the IT portion of the engagement, what is the most important process area that you may need to consider? Anyone? Are you guys there?
Would it be the HRMS system? Something like PeopleSoft or Workday, maybe?
Okay, because here we are saying that you are asked to perform an audit of a payroll process.
Mm-hmm.
So what would be the most important process area that you need to consider? So maybe to help with that, one of the answers would be the business processes surrounding the payroll process. So you need to understand the business processes around the payroll process. So if, say, for instance, you are looking at the payroll process, what are the processes around that? You need to understand those processes first before you engage in the payroll. So what about the second part where it says if you are to perform an audit, would it be better to know the IS audit budget or to know the CIO and CFO risk profile for payroll processes? Which is the correct answer?
So many processes can be there. One would be like the calculation controls, like which are automated controls, which calculate the salary to be processed based on the number of days and number of leaves and etc. So the
Okay, so that,
system
yeah,
logic controls.
yeah, basically that answers the first part around the business processes. So yeah, like we were talking about the calculations and all manner of activities around the payroll. So for the second part, where they're asking whether you would perform the audit, I mean, whether you want to know the budget or to know the CIO and CFO risk profile. Here, the answer would be you need to know the CIO and the CFO risk profile for payroll processes so that you're able then now to tell what type of controls exist, and basically is what you are saying around what type of rights they have and what type of capabilities they may have or able to execute. So the auditor, as you plan the IT portion, the understanding should be of the systems that support the business processes. And also other considerations should include the business processes surrounding the payroll process and the systems or applications supporting these processes. So basically, you have touched on one of that, which is correct and needs to be part of what should be as the assignment. Okay, so let's look at this question as an example. And I would give you 1 minute to look at it. Maybe I'll just read through the question first, then I give you a minute to determine. The question says, due to resource constraints of the IS audit team, the audit plan is originally, or the audit plan as originally approved, cannot be completed, assuming that the situation is communicated in the audit report, which course of action is most acceptable. So you look at the question and determine which is the correct answer, either A, B, or C, or D. Just read it. I'll give you 1 minute. What is your choice?
C.
Okay. So anybody else with a different answer? Okay, the correct answer is C. Basically, when you have resource constraints and the audit plan as originally approved cannot be completed, so the most acceptable option would be to focus on auditing the high risk areas. You remember, audit is about risk. So you would be better off with the limited resources that you have to look at the high risk areas. Okay, so that is the correct answer. So this is a typical example of an exam question that you will get. I will share with you others and including their answers that will then now help you to navigate around the exam. Okay, so let's look at this other one. This is another question. It says, although management has stated otherwise, an IS auditor has reasons to believe that the organization is using software that is not licensed. In this situation, the IS auditor should first do what? There are 4 answers, so choose one. I'll give you 1 minute.
A, maybe? Because I think it's important to report what's management's assertion.
Any other?
I think D, because this includes the compliance and everything. So as a first step.
Okay, so for this one, the correct answer is B, because if you read the question, it says that management has stated otherwise, but the auditor has reasons to believe that the organization is using software that is not licensed. So you need to verify first. Auditor should obtain, you need to have the evidence before putting it in the report.
Yeah, I was
Okay.
confused between B and D.
Yeah, that happens in this exam. So like you see, when I mentioned, you look at the text that says first, it's in bold. So whenever you see such a question, with such a word highlighted, you need to think very, very carefully and very cautiously, because the answers all look similar, and they are tempting. You can always tempt to include it in the report. You can always tempt to include the statement from management in the report. You can always be tempted to discuss the issue with management, which is correct. But then what you need to do first before you do that is to verify that the software in use is not licensed. First, have the facts, then now you can discuss with the management. That one tests your approach to the audit process. Okay. So then now let's look at types of controls. We look at types of controls. I think we can take another small break because we have done another hour. This hour